Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank.
Hey everybody, welcome back to our podcast. We're glad that you're with us today. Today we're going to be talking about how to help your friends enter into the hobby of gaming. So in a previous podcast, we talked about some of the advantages between playing at home with just a group of friends or going out to a game shop, game cafe, and playing. But today what we want to focus on is, maybe you're into the hobby, you're really starting to find some games that you like. How do you convince your friends who may not be into the hobby to start playing with you? So Frank, you have the most experience with kind of starting a game group, inviting people in. I know you've talked about it a little bit before, but what would be some of your suggestions on how to convince people to come to a game night and know that it's not our favorite Monopoly or Pictionary?
So it's interesting because I have been pretty successful at inviting people to the game group. I've been far less successful at getting them to stay.
Keeping them there. Yeah.
The first step is getting them here.
Yeah. Well, I guess step one, have friends. Get friends.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can help all of you with that. Okay, step one, get friends, or at least people who will talk to you.
So the interesting part is you kind of get this through the discussions that you have every day in terms of hobbies, and eventually get the feeling, you start getting an idea for how geeky these people are. And I use the word geek intentionally because in my mind, being geeky just means that you have a somewhat uncommon thing that you're passionate about. So there are people who are geeky about more common things, I guess, like there are people who are engineers who are geeky about their work.
I really want to know what those geeky things were that you saw in Brent and I to invite us and keep inviting us.
So I can answer this about you, Shane, because what you have is you have a very specific knowledge and passion for ministry with kids. And along with that, having fun.
Yes.
And so that kind of said, it wouldn't surprise me if this guy is the type of person who would enjoy playing games. I did not get, so you have to recognize that with Brent didn't come here through my invitation.
Lindsay drug you here.
Frank's very successful way of inviting people to the game day is his wife does it for him without telling him until afterwards.
So that can be
people just walk in and, look.
That can be overly successful. That's how we've ended up with game days with like 16 people.
Yeah.
It's a house con.
We have had a few of those. And that's great. I usually get relegated to the game in the basement.
And I can only say that because now my wife's starting to invite people to the same game group without necessarily telling Frank beforehand.
That's true.
Although she started that early. She started pretty much right off the bat. I'm doing this. Is this okay?
I've already done this. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's the next step. To some extent, you have to recognize that you're going to end up inviting more people than are ever going to stay. In my experience, and granted, I'm a grand total sample size of 1, but the simple fact is you are going to have people who even push and say, "I want to come to this because I think it sounds like fun." They come, they don't like the style of game or the type of game or the complexity of the games or whatever. They didn't like games as much as they thought they did. They fall away.
Or life happens.
That's certainly impacted a lot of people.
I mean, we've even all had short seasons where we're not able to play as much or come as much.
Right.
All that. Yeah, I think another thing when I think about people who really haven't played games much and inviting them to play games with me, and tell me your experiences on this, I have to be very willing to play games that I don't really like. Because if I'm trying to invite new people into the hobby and introduce them to it, I have to be willing to play the games that they're really into and they really like, just to, help them introduce them into it, to rules, to, all of the different mechanics and all the different...
Right.
I want to say phraseology, but that's not a word.
Taxonomy?
Yeah, all the different words of board gaming.
I mean, yeah, definitely what we talked about season 1 and season 2, where we were bringing up types of games. All of that has to kind of be introduced before people really understand the hobby or get into the hobby. So you got to choose those games carefully to what games you're going to introduce, and may not be ones you actually enjoy playing all the time.
And I feel like they got to know what they're walking into. If you're like, hey, do you just want to come over for a casual night of hanging out, and then you know,
Spring games on.
yeah, bust out some complicated games, I'm not sure that'll go over super well.
So to some extent, it depends. When I invited Dave, he said, my wife and I played Magic while she was in the beginning stages of labor with our first child. Okay, this is probably somebody who likes games, at least enough to try them, right? Now, his wife has come once, maybe twice, but she hasn't come since, just because she kind of has to be in the mood to play games, and there's only certain ones she likes.
Yeah.
And Dave, on the other hand, is coming all the time and bringing, members of his family with him, which has worked out great. So sometimes you do very definitely get that indication, oh, these are people who like to play games. Lindsay, when Kay talked to her about games, she talked to Kay about you guys playing role-playing games. And we thought, okay, so complexity is clearly not an issue. Now the question is a board game going to be something they like? Because it's a very different style from an RPG.
I think something that I've noticed too when I invite friends over early on and they're looking through my board game collection is they'll very much pick games based on theme, just because they don't know about mechanics or complexity ratings or anything like that. And it's difficult to, especially if they're excited about it, it's difficult to say like, well, let's not play that one and not be like, because you can't handle it. But I think there have been some times where I've tried to teach games that were a little too complicated for where people are at. And it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes they get discouraged, but then sometimes they feel challenged and want to learn and figure it out and really engaged with the theme.
I agree. This is where you, the listener, are benefiting from our wisdom, and hopefully that you have some idea of what all these terms are. Okay, maybe not me.
Go back and listen to the first two seasons.
Season 1 and 2.
So hold that thought, because you're absolutely right. But Brent, you've invited people, Shane, over to your place, and that's been relatively successful. You've had people come back. You and Lindsay have invited people over and then play games rather than invite people over to play games.
Yep, we've had people over and then decided to ask them if they wanted to play games while they were over.
And you've had mixed results with that.
Yes, and I think a lot of that has to do with level of interest, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, they're not there to play games. They're there for socializing, generally. Some people feel like that's socializing still, some don't. Some feel that that's more thought than they want to put into that, I guess. I don't know. We have had mixed experiences, and we're going on vacation here soon with people who don't normally play games. We're going to take some. We'll see how that goes too. More as this is something we like to do. Well, if you want to do it with us, feel free. If you don't, okay, we'll move on. And we always give people the option. We're not going to force a game on someone. Sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it just flops. And I can't really say that there's a reason one way or another.
So I think,
do they want to?
Yeah. So I think step 2, after step 1 is get friends. Yeah. Step 2 is decide whether you want to have an evening of socialization and maybe play games, or whether you are specifically inviting people over to play games, because those do, I think, require 2 different approaches.
Which is funny, because when Jen and I come to your house, Brent, it's very odd to sit there and we're talking and maybe eating, and I get the sense of okay, when are we going to play a game? If we came over, when's the game coming out? And typically we will, even if it's a very short game. Frank, while you were talking, I was thinking about our conversation with Eric Dewey and how he talks about how you build up all of these games really quickly and you buy a ton of games and you kind of decide, no, I want to refine that, and then you can get rid of some. And now I'm thinking, do I do that with friends? I try to make a lot of friends, but then I get more discerning after a while. Are you going to enjoy the same games I like? And if not, do I call you for my game friends collection? But it's kind of true.
Isn't that the way Facebook works too? Yeah. You get a whole bunch of friends and then you start getting rid of something.
No, but really, I do have friends that I see a lot because we get together and play games a lot. But I have friends I don't see very often because they're not into the hobby, and that's one of the main ways I spend time with friends. So I don't know what my point is, but
I think part of your point is, to some degree, if that's one of your main hobbies, forming a game group is going to kind of happen, or you're going to get involved in a game group because that's how you want to spend your time.
It kind of happens naturally. And I even think about, my friends like Keegan or Elizabeth or Rebecca, and, none of them are hardcore gamers, but out of our natural friendship, we've kind of found games that we enjoy playing together and, games that will bring out it to the table anytime we're hanging out. So even those friendships, games have kind of come in to be a part of that.
Well, and I think that's true. I mean, if we go up to either of our families, they almost expect, I mean, if we haven't been there for a while, that we will have a game around, whether we ever play it or not, but they know there will be one somewhere
always
available.
Watching from the corner, the lonely board game box.
So we've got step 1, get friends. Step 2, figure out whether you want it to be a social night or not. So if it's, yeah.
Whether you want it specifically to be a game night or just social time. Maybe play.
Maybe I Freudian slip there. Some of this depends on also whether you're inviting, how many people you're inviting over, because it gets more difficult if you're inviting, 2 couples over, and so there's going to be 6 of you. So count makes a difference. I have a friend, I have not, part of the group in Cincinnati, I have not seen Doug. I saw him at Christmas last year, and we probably hadn't seen each other in 7 months. We saw each other at our wedding prior to that. And he came up specifically to play a game. He's a history teacher. He loves war games, specifically those around the Revolutionary War. I said, hey, come up, we'll play Washington's War. And he came up, and that's really all we did. But it was very specifically, he knew that's why he was coming up. Yeah, we talked about other stuff. Gaming ultimately does allow for other socialization unless you are just really that hardcore. So some of that does depend on what your target is. So now, how did you first introduce some of your friends, Shane, to board gaming?
I think first I got involved in the hobby, here, and then actually had another group of friends who, the first time I met them, they came over to play board games. They came over to my place. A mutual friend had brought them, knew that they played games. And they were kind of at the same experience level as the gaming group. Like, they had played quite a bit. They had a collection. So first I kind of got into it, with friends. And then as I started building up my own collection, I would, just kind of evangelize board games to my friends and say, like, hey, I know we're hanging out tonight. Would you guys be willing to try this? Or when they're there, saying, like, hey, we finished what we were going to do in an hour and we still have 3 hours to hang out. So let's play a 3-hour game. No, we'd play gateway games. But, so just kind of as I would build my collection, and, I would host, what did we call them? I think we just called them like guys' nights, where I'd invite all my guy friends over. And, the first few times we just kind of hung out, and then we kind of started introducing like Settlers of Catan into that group. And then we realized, like, hey, we're just 5 sweaty guys in this little downtown apartment. Like, let's invite girls. And so we started inviting girls, and so we couldn't call it guys' night, so we started calling it game night. So it was just kind of a slow process of kind of meeting people who are into gaming, and then, hanging out with my friends and inviting them to play as well. And some of them will, jump in and play pretty much any game I'll pull out. Some of them I know just not to pull out a game because it's not going to fly.
Right. Brent?
I have not started a gaming group. So.
No, but in terms of getting your friends to, and maybe we need to flip this around, right, and say, what are the potential pitfalls, the landmines you can step on when you invite people over to play a game? For instance, one of them is the complexity pitfall landmine that you talked about, Shane, where you invite somebody over and they go, wow, Twilight Imperium 3 looks like a really cool game. Let's pull that out.
I love the artwork.
Okay, let's slow down. You end up in that thing where, okay, I'm not sure you're really ready to commit 6 hours. That's an easy question, right? I can ask that. Are you willing to commit 6 hours to a game? If that doesn't slow them down, I mean, that may not want to be the first question yes, because if they say yes, you might be hooked.
That's actually a really good point, because I feel like looking at the time rating on a game can really help people figure out if they're interested in playing or not.
I think
not
it
that
does
there's
too.
Direct correlation, but I think that's a great way for people who aren't familiar with games to figure out if they want to play specific games.
So length frequently, not always, but frequently has some correlation to complexity.
Yeah.
The other thing is, go ahead, Brent.
So what I've found at least is that I generally don't give a large selection of games that people can choose from unless I know that they have played games and would have some idea to look for things like time length or player counts. I don't even try. I just give them 2 selections and say, okay, here's 2 games we can play. Which one do you want to play?
So where are your games stored?
Upstairs.
Okay, so you have to
In
go
a
up
back
and get
bedroom.
them.
Yeah.
So what happens is, for me, is I end up with, since the family has roughly 300 board games, is people want to see the collection, and then they go, oh, let's play a game. Let's play this. And it's like, okay, now, because I didn't bring up 2 or 3 games and say, here, limit their choice, I can end up stuck in that situation. And you got to be careful, because if you say, I don't think you're ready for that, the next thing out of their mouth is, what? You don't think I'm smart enough to play this? And the answer might be
You
yes.
are correct.
But we don't say this. What we tend to say is, okay, what I say. I don't know what you guys say. My comment is typically, there's a level of complexity that I've found a lot of people think feels like work. My sister's level of complexity is, if it's a game and she has to think, it feels like work. And we're talking about, she's not a dummy. That's not fun to her to think in that way.
Yeah.
My brother's attitude is, if I'm going to think that hard, I'll just work, because he enjoys work. So the question is, where's that complexity level that's still fun? The 3 of us will take on pretty much anything. I don't think we've had a game yet that we've said, I don't ever want to play that again because it's too complex.
No.
Might be other reasons why we don't play the game, but complexity is not the issue.
Yeah.
But if you talk to my wife, or Shane, if you talk to Jenna, there's a point of complexity where it's the fun factor starts going down for them.
Yeah. Jenna's pretty much always willing to play a game. The question is, which game is it? Because she enjoys playing, but there certainly is a level where it starts feeling like work, or I think sometimes she feels like she just can't compete and she wants to be competing in the game. And so if it's a set of mechanics that she doesn't enjoy or quite feel as comfortable with as other ones, I think she wants to, A, be competing, and then B, also just be able to enjoy it and not have to dig in too hard, not have to struggle with the game. Because there's definitely been games where I play the first time and I don't get it at all, but I think to myself, like, oh man, I need to play that again. I think
Right.
I feel like I was close. I need to play it again. So I think you're definitely right that it can be challenging to match people up with a complexity of a game that will work for them.
Now, on the flip side, Lindsay's a lot more willing to take on something or enjoy something that's a little bit more
She's
complex.
not always willing to play them, but
Right.
she's willing to take them on when she's willing to.
Yeah, when she's in the middle. So that whole complexity thing is a portion of getting people to play. And you can turn people off real quick if you introduce them into something that's beyond what they're ready for, and you can turn other people off. You guys weren't involved in the one I'm thinking of, but we've had a Fury of Dracula game that somebody, because they didn't really understand the complexity, started getting way down in the weeds and coordinating every possible move the hunters could make, and it really bogged down the game, and no one enjoyed it very much. I was punching another game out while I was playing Dracula because it was taking that long between my turns.
I think another big part of getting people into gaming and playing games, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about teaching games, but is helping them in their first game with strategy and being willing to almost give up the win to help them understand it better. Not that I'm going to lose intentionally.
Yeah, you're not
but
throwing the game.
I'm going to point out good strategy to them, even if it hurts me, because I want them to feel like they're successful. And also, I don't enjoy games that I just understand the rules to. I want to understand some of the strategy and understand how to be competitive. And I think most people do. Most people don't want to just get rules. They want to get the game and the theme and what they're trying to accomplish. So really helping them along and pointing out, and even saying like, you can make that move, but I'll tell you exactly what my response is going to be, and it's not going to be pretty. So, like, letting them know, if they're going to make a really bad move or encouraging them, when they're doing well.
So I think you talked earlier, Shane, about theme being one of the things to hook people with. And I do think that's very true. So if people like trains, Ticket to Ride's great. If they like Godzilla movies, you can start with King of Tokyo or King of New York. Then one of my favorite gateway games is Carcassonne, which is only got a pretty thin theme on it. Mm-hmm. So do you guys do anything special to invite people in who are new to the hobby and say, here's a game, how do I hook you because it doesn't really have a theme?
I don't think I would use that game to start, to be honest. I think, at least with the friends that I've played with, there has to be something identifiable for them and something they can relate to before we even open the box and pull out all the pieces.
See, the only exception I would say to that is games that are less than 20-minute games. At that point, I don't feel like you need the theme necessarily because it's going to be over fast enough that people aren't going to care. But otherwise, I would want to pull out a theme game for people.
So it's interesting. When I tend to use Carcassonne the most is when they have said, bring over a game and we'll play. So they already have made some level of commitment.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do agree with you guys. I do use it. It's my favorite gateway game. But, again, I won't necessarily pull it out and say, here, let me entice you to play a game with this thing that has no theme and no way for you to relate to it. Yeah, that doesn't work.
I even think about myself, and when you brought out Go Nuts for Donuts, I was like, I don't like these mechanics, but I love donuts, so I'm going to play this game.
You were going to say, Brent?
But I would pull out something like King Domino because it's short enough and everyone understands the matching theme.
And dominoes,
right,
which effectively is what they are.
That it doesn't matter that there's not any real theme on top of that game. So something like that I would pull out for a new player because it's simple and short.
I think I've used Love Letter a lot too. That's a very quick game. And you can even say, like, we're just going to play three hands of it.
Yeah.
And then pack up.
I've used that one several times.
And you also have to recognize when you're doing this that it's not going to work for everybody. There are people who will never play games. So I started
You shouldn't be friends with them, but there are people that will never play games.
So there are this training I've been in. I've mentioned it before, and I got a game night started with this. There were people who were ready to jump in and have fun, and maybe some of them had some familiarity with games, normally more word association type games, but there were people who were willing. And I think I started with Love Letter, Codenames, and the Resistance, and it pretty much got to the point where, because we were only doing this every few months, Codenames and Resistance was basically the only thing we played.
Yeah,
we played. One of the guys brought a couple of games the last time, and we played. I don't even remember what the games were, but we played a couple of his games, which worked out fine. But by that point in time, people were the group of people who were there to play that were kind of hooked.
I definitely think that for me, abstract games are really bad to introduce people to into gaming because when I play abstract games, I feel a lot of pressure to get the game, like to understand it and to do well at it, because there's not much more to enjoy in it other than the gameplay. Right? In most abstract games, you're not really going to love the artwork. I have a game called Soulfall that it's pretty good. It was from Kickstarter, but the artwork is phenomenal. And people will comment on that when we play. So for me, at least, abstract games can be really hard to introduce people to just because there's not really a lot to latch onto other than the gameplay itself. And I feel like that can introduce a lot of pressure for a brand new player.
Yeah, unless they already play chess or something like that. They're already... they already have another abstract game that they're fond of. I think you're probably right. Again, unless Brent's caveat that it's short enough that it doesn't really make that much difference.
Because, I would pull out Santorini with a new player. It's visually appealing.
It is. Yeah. Even though it's an abstract, it's got good bits.
And you really only have 3 rules, so...
Fairly simple.
You're going to get it. Whether you do well or not, it's probably a different story.
Right.
But you're going to get it.
But you're going to start figuring out the strategy pretty quickly.
All of this conversation, I think, is getting to the point of you can really love board games But at the end of the day, you're always going to need people to play with, unless you just enjoy one-player board games.
Which
But
do
for the most
exist.
part, yeah, but for the most part, you're going to need people sitting around the table. And it's not always easy to start a formal game group. It's not always easy just to approach a group out in public at a game shop or a cafe and introduce yourself and sit down to play. So we really want to encourage you, if there's a game you really love, to take it to your friends, even if they're not board game players. You know, if they're good friends, they might try it out once just to appease you, or just to, you know, maybe check out the things that you like. So the next time you're looking for people to play, you don't have to look too far. Introduce your friends to the hobby, introduce them to the games you like, and hopefully they'll become gamers too, and you'll get them listening to our podcast.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.